Good morning. Hello. I know it's a tall order just before lunch, so this is going to be interesting. Glad to be here, and just want to start off by saying that the focus of what I'm going to be talking about for the next 20 or so minutes is really about us as people. And I believe that each one of us here and in our organizations has the ability to be creative and to be innovative and are problem solvers. It's just that we don't get the opportunity and the bandwidth to do so. So how can we make each of us innovative? How can we actually be brilliant every day, in a sense, all the time? And how can we enable that is really the focus of what I'm going to be speaking about. Just make sure I can actually switch slides. Sorry. There you go. So I lead a new group in MassMutual, which is known as Knowledge and Cognitive Solutions. And what we're trying to do is really look at leveraging how experts think, have people solve problems, and tie that to create tools that would actually empower everybody to be able to do their work more effectively by providing that information in the flow of their work. More importantly, so we're really about knowledge, which is the disconnected bits of information that may live in your head that kind of come together to solve problems that we're dependent on. Our experiences, which make those connections for us. What do we know? Who do we know? How do we know it? Why did we do something? Why did we do it that way today? And why should we do it differently tomorrow? And essentially, how do we actually enable creativity to happen? What is creativity? We often talk about serendipitous collision of ideas to enable creativity. That's almost as if it comes by chance, and we can do a bunch of things and processes that may get us closer to enabling it. But it doesn't have to be. We can make it more predictable, and that's what we're talking about as the cornerstones of getting to that. We're a 160-year-old organization, 160 plus years old. We've reinvented ourselves many a time in this period. We've pivoted, we've grown, and yet we find ourselves at this very interesting crossroads, juncture, where we have a lot of change happening. We have really change, as many of the other speakers have alluded to, in terms of the distribution channels, our customers and their expectations, in the kinds of products that we would have to create and produce and sell. We're doing very interesting things in hybrid product space across the spectrum. We've got exchanges going. So I want to just start by saying that this isn't the only thing we're doing around innovation in our organization. We've actually been doing a lot of different things that others have alluded to and spoken about, labs, accelerators, and all of those things, using data science and so forth. But this is an experimental piece of work, and more importantly, this is really about beginning to go down to the basics and think about what is it that will drive a sustainable culture of innovation and now enable us to scale so that we are able to be ambidextrous all the time. We're asking our people to be ambidextrous. We're asking that we are able to be thinking out of the box, big picture, innovative, as well as be able to carry forth our operational tasks every day. And I just heard that in the last session, that sometimes it's hard, because more often than not it's hard, and therefore innovation goes down the agenda. So how do we make it so that it doesn't have to be happening in a corner out there or in a pocket solving a certain type of problem, but actually is encountered every day, so that every one of us, as we do our work, are able to solve the problems that we have to solve on a daily basis, but maybe come up with breakthroughs as part of that. How do we tap into the inner innovator in every single individual, and how do we actually make it possible to be able to scale this up really rapidly? So I'm going to speak about a few things that are core to that, which are around the kinds of information or knowledge that enables that sort of thing. And it's really to do with what is known as peripheral knowledge, so the information that seems completely irrelevant at the outset, but actually has connections, that has to do with your experience, or with something that you encounter as you're going around doing your work. So why is it that when we have that sort of information available to us that we don't use it? It's essentially because of our bandwidth of our brains and our inability to really take on that much cognitive load. So we tend to become cognitive misers and focus on the task at hand. And so we'll be talking more about what that is, how do we actually enable for that to happen. But I want to just spend a couple of minutes focused on, here, sorry, Yeah. On the critical success factors, no matter what sort of innovation program you're actually building, to the culture of innovation. And this, I think, has been touched upon again by most other speakers. And so I won't spend a lot of time here, but to me, essentially, it's about trust and diversity. We need to trust each other. We need to trust in our abilities to be able to try something, experiment, and fail, to trust to be able to develop a hypothesis, trust each other's expertise, and know when to let a discipline lead and when to step back. So there's trust in leadership and whatnot. But another very important aspect is obviously cognitive diversity. So diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, bringing forth the different walks of life. And you see that happen in most innovation processes. When you bring in people that are completely unrelated into the early stages of ideation, it makes a difference. And that's, how do we actually have that happen all the time? So I just want to touch for a second on, when we speak about culture, we often talk about the adjacent probable and the fact that culture tends to, over time, the current culture tends to kind of step back and prevent you from moving forward. So you may make a lot of progress, you probably train people, you're trying things out, and when you put it out into the real world, when you're actually making it mainstream, the old culture comes and sweeps it back. So what we need to really focus on is the adjacent improbable, the things that you wouldn't have thought about, the weakest links, and so forth. And to build that culture, you pretty much have to have people be able to really think about things that are relevant in the scope of and in the context of what they're really doing right now. So what makes effective problem solvers? If you break it down to the very basics, what we're trying to do is solve problems differently, trying to frame these problems differently and come up with very effective solutions that differentiate us. So we do need domain knowledge, obviously, and multi-domain, the better, because everything is interconnected. We need to be thinking about the conditions and contexts in which we do our work. So the more context-specific something is, the more context-aware we are, the more effective our utilization is going to be, and the less the noise is going to be in terms of cognitive overload. And we also need to understand how will we deal with ambiguity. Very often when I go out and speak to folks, in any of the industries that I worked in, typically they're expected, the more concrete the problem is defined, the better the ability of people to solve for it. What differentiates true innovators tends to be, or good problem solvers, as I like to think about them more generically, is their ability to deal with ambiguity. So how are they actually going to approach it? What do I have to do? How do I go about doing this? Where do I even begin? What is the unknown unknown? And how do I start with that? We tap into our social networks very often because we're building off on legacy, right? We're building off on the way things were done. And we're going to go into a sea of change, but you can't really have that change happen completely disconnected with the reality of where we are and how we got here. So the networks become really important, and then it really comes down to how do we think about this. So what differentiates these problem solvers? Whether you look at it in the medical field, and I have actually worked with the National Cancer Institute on enabling cancer research and innovation across the world in collaboration between cancer researchers, and this is something we came across over there, which is that it's about how it's not just what they know. Well, that is important. It's really about how do they think of something, how do they frame a problem, what are the questions they ask, what catches their attention when they're looking at something. They know where to tap, literally. And how is our information organized? And most importantly, how is it interpreted? And if we can gather those insights and dynamically provide that to folks who may not be, may not either have that, may not be wired that way, say it simply, or may have less experience in a domain to be able to do so, we probably will be able to get them closer to being able to come up with those serendipitous collisions of ideas. So it's really about enabling nonlinear problem solving. And I just want to talk briefly about a story here, share a story of some work we've been doing with a group of folks who have been with our organization about 25 years on an average, experts in their space. And they're the only people that we could go to who could actually identify what the problem is and fix it within like minutes on very, very important technology that's been around for a really long time and on which our business runs. So these folks tend to, and the reason there are only so few of them is because they've been around. They know what touches what and when and why. And we were able to spend a lot of time with them, working with them to understand how they went about it. We gave them scenarios. We looked at how they worked through problems. When they were in the space, we actually sat and observed. And we gave them situations that were completely absurd that had never occurred to see how they worked through that. And through all of this, we were able to understand and model how they approach the problem. And new people in that space, it takes them about 6 years to even just begin to be working independently. I mean, let alone being able to solve these sorts of complex problems. And we were able to build them something that was from, when you put in a symptom, would get you closest to the cause and get you information from wherever the sources were. And there's a lot of unstructured information in the world that we lived in, and a lot that's getting created. So we have information overload. So context helps there, but really being able to draw all of that together and present it to the people so that they're able to jump with it and run. And our early testing is showing that this is indeed representative of how those experts think, and it is helping solve those problems. It still isn't coming to what I wanted to talk about, which is the fact that a lot of our knowledge, like I mentioned early in the beginning, was that it's about the peripheral information, the irrelevant stuff, right? So when you're sitting in on an innovation process and you're looking with a design firm, they typically will begin a project by thinking about, so what are those bits of information that make the most sense for us to look at? What's that body of knowledge that we need to look at, which may not be completely connected to this, but is kind of relevant? And so it's beginning to frame that, but you don't always have the luxury of time to do so. So getting that into people at the time that they need it. It's also, so there's two types of peripheral knowledge, essentially. There's peripheral knowledge that is to do with transplantation, similar to, let's say, the Reebok shoes for basketball players that ended up actually using the technology that was used to create IV bags, right? Typical transplantation. You pick something up from one place and put it in another. Experts traditionally do that. With all the experts that we worked with, they found that what differentiates them is their knowledge and experience over the years touching multiple disciplines and domains and knowing how these things are interconnected, so they can zero in on what it needs to be and are able to take something from one place and put it in another and then make it work, and so solve a problem in a uniquely different fashion. But the more effective for breakthrough innovation is indeed the ability to change perspective, to shift perspective because of the information that you're drawing in on. So, for instance, I was looking at, if you were to listen to the gentleman from UNICEF that was mentioned this morning and what they were doing over there, how could we utilize that for some of the problems we're solving in the corporate world, just to speak. But so it really becomes about changing and reframing your problem and thinking about it very differently that leads to those breakthroughs. So again, how do we know what is relevant? How do we know what's connected to it? And even if it's seemingly unconnected, you can use semantic intelligence to get you there. And most importantly, how do you look at networks? Because within every company, there are lots of social networks, and these social networks are where you glean a lot of this information from. So when we looked at what we like to call a group of 10, we looked at our firefighting operational problem area, and we realized that of the most tricky, most hairy problems that we had, the people that were able to solve that were like a group of 10. Those names came up over and over again. They tended to work with each other. And they were not experts in any given domain. Some of them were, but for the most part, they actually were good problem solvers that could just apply themselves anywhere. And they used their social networks to glean that information, but they were good at looking at the peripheral information that came in, and so were able to reframe the problem and solve it differently. So that was a very interesting insight for us. And so it really becomes about connecting the dots and breaking it down to the very basics of understanding what's unique about our organization and the work we do. What is it that actually helps us do what we do, and how do we do it? What are the facts that we have that we can actually provide to people? Because I spoke about trust. If you're not going to give me something that I can trust and reuse effectively, if I can't reapply it, if I cannot use it to adapt, and I cannot do knowledge adaptation, or co-create, or more importantly, co-evolve, then it's a challenge. So what are the facts and what are the experience that people have to share, and how can we enable that? And then it's about our people, most importantly. What are the relationships they have, the collaborations? How do you actually enable collaboration to happen? Where should that collaboration happen? And what are the unique backgrounds that are required? So it's the collective intelligence of the groups that we're trying to create, and how do we bring them together with each other? And then essentially about context and providing context, looking at what are the questions to ask, what are the approaches to take, really, and then building a system that continues to look at the patterns and understand those unwritten rules and bring those forth, and is dynamic as it grows and is able to then solve tomorrow's problems, not just today's. So with that, I just want to kind of end by saying that there are multiple elements to this, obviously, and we do spend a lot of time looking at and examining how we do our work, what are the impacts, and aspects of it and opportunities, and really studying the different types of experts, because expertise can sometimes be limiting. It's you know, like, this is where I work, this is my worldview and my mental model, and I'm not going to go beyond that. And then there's a clash when you bring in different experts. So bringing the best in your organization together is not necessarily going to solve the problem. It's what's that mix, right? So studying and understanding that is part of what we do. It's also about trying to build a system that models this thinking and then connect it to all the unstructured content. We haven't cracked everything, but we're seeing early and good progress over here, and there are lots of interesting ideas of how you actually connect that to maybe a patent database, and you begin to understand the innovations that are happening. And then you begin to say, oh, well, the silos in which pockets in which things are going on, we need to kind of look at this together, because there is an opportunity over here to do this. And that wouldn't be obvious to you if you just read it, but if the machine was able to read it, and because it can look at such a larger capacity and volume, you're building that innovation capacity by augmenting the human intellect. And I don't think we're going to become necessarily dependent on machines. What we're really trying to do here is to work on the neuroplasticity, which is really our brain's ability to reform its pathways when it is given information in context, continually, over time, in the flow of my work. So I don't have to do this as an extra. I don't have to think about this. It's just part of what I do, and it's presented to me in a fashion and an insight that I'm able to jump on it and act and make decisions, because we make so many decisions in our lives, and we often make bad decisions because of information overload. So it's multiple problems, very multi-layered, that we're trying to look at, but the core of that, and essentially, is this. And so we're hopeful. Thank you.
Great talk, Gopika. So this audience likes concreteness. So the one that's getting all the thumbs up says, can you give an example of an innovation that came out of your practice? And could be at MassMutual, could be at one of your prior companies.
Sure. Well, several examples. I'm going to go with something that, let's see.
And we'll keep this just between us. You know, nobody needs to tweet this example or live stream you.
I shouldn't be giving you a MassMutual one, so I'm going to try and think of something else. Innovation, well, something that I can speak to. The aerospace industry, there was something around material reusability. That was a big challenge. It was a regulation. We had to think about how we were going to overcome that, and we were able to, using this practice of tying people to the innovation, to the work, able to come up with a means and an algorithm that actually helped us with that.
So reusing materials or using excess materials?
Essentially, yeah, you have to have like a 98% reusability stat for materials that are used in an airplane, according to the European Union. So to be able to get to that exact in your design really early on, so you don't go all the way, you know, like to the design phase, but as you're just beginning to plug your design in, to have them, to be able to figure out what materials would make sense, where and when and how.
Great. Let's take this second question down. If you can, we have a tie here. We'll have to get to all of these. If you can model how the expert thinks, doesn't that become a process instead of innovation?
It could. So any work that you do, and you do over a couple of times, can become a process. But what I failed to tell you in my talk was that when you ask an expert, how do you actually do this? How did you come up with this? They always say it depends, right? There's never a clear answer, because there could be like a million permutations and combinations. So a process would be definitive. However, how we practice something, we like to call that lived work experience. And it's really about how do we actually do it, and observing that enough, and knowing that to the extent, I would say to a large probability, to be able to provide you the closest approximation of what you may need to think, or where you may need to go to look at something. So it's your perspective, it's giving you an insight. We don't give you the solve, we give you the insight that enables you to then think and solve the problem. We also give you information that you wouldn't have considered. And very often we give you things that you wouldn't know was there for you to think about.
All right, I think there's a question in the audience. Go ahead. And stand up maybe so we can see you.
I am.
We see you.
See me?
Yes, round of applause. Oh my gosh.
Can't see me. So one of the great things about this conference is that you get to see a lot of different approaches, and there's no silver bullet for anything. and it's about maybe taking some best practices that work here and there and applying it to your situation. With Haven Life, it seems like it goes against some of the things we've heard today about keeping innovation close to the business line. Can you talk a little about how, Haven Life was structured differently from that concept?
I can't go into too many details, but and we can talk a little offline maybe. But I think it's not that you're not close to the business line. Sometimes you have to experiment and you have to do things a little differently. It depends on the problem. I personally believe it depends on the problem you're trying to solve, and you don't always. If you have to do things differently from the way that it's always been done, which for us is a very different distribution model, then you kind of have to have it outside, and it doesn't. By having almost a separate startup environment, if you would, outside, you're able to solve for those things. But there is a close tie-in to what we're doing as a business and to our strategy and where we want to go. So it isn't completely away from it.
But that's a new venture that's not in a existing MassMutual business unit or facility?
Well, it is in an existing MassMutual in a sense, but we kind of kept them aside. So it's the picture I showed you of the social network that works within outside of the formal structure, right? Mm-hmm. But it is branded very differently, and we run it differently. However, it is the parent company continues to be MassMutual. There is a tie-in to what we're trying to do.
Great.
So can't get into more specifics than
and
that.
There's this one question at the top that's getting liked as much as like somebody's cute baby picture on Facebook. Knowing how innovators think, can that be taught, or is it a talent? Is it innate?
Knowing how innovators think, you mean?
Well, I guess you've studied a lot how innovators think.
It can be taught. I think being being one of those people that creates the difficult questions in the room makes it a little bit easier maybe to see what others are doing, but you can study it. You absolutely can study it. There are folks who are studying this very closely, and there are multiple techniques that one can use to do so. So design thinking is a great way, again, because you're teaching through experiences and creating the muscle memory. But the challenge with anything where you're teaching folks how to do something is that until they go back and apply it every single day and they're reminded of it, it's going to be lost, right?
Yeah.
And when work pressure takes on, what ends up happening is that I have to focus to get this job done. I'm just going to default to what I know and what I need to do and not worry about the other stuff, which is why, as we were thinking about our problem, it made sense to actually have it in the flow of work and have everything provided to me when it is. So it's not, so we're borrowing from, concepts from multiple different disciplines. You can absolutely do this through observation. You can use ethnography. You can use technology today to go through the discovery process of figuring out what are people thinking about, what are people talking about, what are the biggest challenges we have, where do they go to look for something, or or just even the unstructured content that exists is going to give you relationships and tell you what classifications are. So there's just a lot that can be done through technology.
Okay, great. But I like that idea of sort of reminder, reinforcement, refresher, that it's not just come to this one-day design thinking workshop and problem solved. Microphone over there. You don't have to stand on the chair, but maybe stand up so we can see you.
Okay. Thank you. I agree. Innovation could be taught, and bulk of that is a process also. Design thinking, agile, what have you. Your presentation alluded to the concept of bringing in experts. So I think when it comes to innovation, there are two types of expertise. You have people who have developed tremendous expertise in some area, doctors, lawyers, engineers, computer scientists. They've put in their 10,000 hours, as Gladwell says. And then you have what's called the strategic intuition, which is about pattern recognition, about connecting the dots, looking at disparate data, synthesizing that, and really, so when do you bring in those people in your discussions?
In the process?
Yes. And then how do you develop those expertise?
All right, so what I talked about today wasn't really the process where you're bringing people in, not the formal innovation process. Those exist for us, and we use that, and we, again, based on scenario, and based on who our vendor partner is, things change too. But what I was referring to over here was just the sheer expertise. So there are two types in my mind, and I agree with you. There are the people that have the great expertise, and so there's the people that have domain expertise, right? So I mentioned domain knowledge. And then there are people that have expertise and experiences that come from having solved problems in that domain. And then there are people that in one of my examples where I talked about who are not domain experts, but are really good at intuitively solving problems and thinking about things. And so we call that, I refer to that as expertise around problem solving. So we're modeling both those, we're really studying both those, and we've been fortunate to actually find people like that in the organization to see, and we're finding some things are similar and some are not. Sometimes the domain expert tends to be linear, but more often than not, they're not just linear, right? It's not just about what level in the, in the hierarchy I am at, but it's really about how well. So if I'm really good at the practice of my craft, I'm likely to be able to go 1, 5, 8, and 3 instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 8, right? And that's kind of what you're looking for in the ability to look. And we find that people who are really good at that tend to be experts not in just one domain, but have many peripheral areas that they're really good at too. So that's the combination. And as we model this, and we're modeling, it's early work, early days as yet, right? But there's a lot of research in this space as well that we're falling back on. And what it tends to say is that, show us, is that as you look at people that are working across different disciplines, the questions they seem to ask to solve similar problems seem to be similar. But what we want is for non-linearity. What we want is for something that is completely different to come in so that we can actually be able to do it. So that's the thing. What are they approaching? What are the things that they look at? Where do they go to get this information? What is it that catches their attention? If I can understand and model that sufficiently and I can actually get a model around that, I may be able to present you with more of that sort of information where you're looking at a certain type of context. And maybe as time goes on, as you're using machine learning, you're studying and you're using these systems, it's studying those behaviors, right? So it's bringing in more and more of that sort of context and information to you.
All right,
that
great.
Answers.
Thank you for all these questions. Thank you, Gopika, for this great talk.
Thank you.
Great job.